Are you a fan of Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice? Have you always dreamed of living out a troubled relationship during the Georgian era of history? I can honestly say from the bottom of my heart, no. No, I have not. 1,000 times no. But hey, who am I to put down a gaming setting before I've even given it a chance? As they said back in the 19th century, let us stop this claptrap and fudge. Translation, absurd, nonsensical talk or ideas, lies, nonsense. So, cut the claptrap and put on your fancy pants because today we are finishing up the Goblin Quest RPG saga with the rules hack, Regency Ladies. Welcome to Claim to Game, the podcast helping busy people master tabletop role-playing games one game at a time. I'm Clint.scheirer. I've been an educator for over 12 years and have helped gamers of all levels quickly grasp tabletop RPGs so they can enjoy playing them to the fullest. Stay tuned so you can make your claim to game. Hello and welcome back to episode 23, season 1 of Claim to Game, a predominantly educational fun podcast in which I'm daring to coin the word fungicational. It's like tripping into a swimming pool, but finding it full of coins. You dive right in like Scrooge McDuck. The game for this season is Goblin Quest the RPG, brought to you by game designer Grant Howitt, whose works include, but are not limited to, Honey Heist, Die the RPG, Spire, Unbound, One Last Job, Heart, Eat the Reich, and right now, at the time of this episode release, the new tabletop RPG, Hollows, fully funded on BackerKit. Our running definition of a rules hack for Goblin Quest is a series of tweaks and twists to the main game which allow you to use it to tell different stories. The seventh and final hack to appear in Goblin Quest the RPG's book on page 114, earned through the Kickstarter stretch goals in 2014, is Regency Ladies, the role-playing game. I will be the first to admit this setting or hack would not be my first go-to. There have been a couple times prior to being married where I was asked by not one, but a few girls I liked to read Pride and Prejudice in high school or college. I may have read the book, not understanding most of it, and probably read over the Spark Notes. Do they still have those? Before I went to go discuss the book to sound like I knew what I was talking about and having meaningful conversation. I know, not my best form, old chap. Looking back, I might just not have been mature enough to appreciate the classic novel for the impact it truly had on TV shows, movies, and literature that we enjoy today. The Jane Austen Society of North America, JASNA, J-A-S-N-A, did you know there was such a thing? Featured an article that was published by Barbara Sherrod of Fort Collins, Colorado, and in it she stated the following: Pride and Prejudice is a classic love story because it set the pattern for a modern popular love story, the story in which an independent-minded and fascinating woman is loved by a remote and powerful man. The attraction between the two is exhibited as hostility at first and then evolves into romantic love, but not necessarily sexual in nature. In this way, I can appreciate this work. Even if it wasn't my favorite book of all time, it sets a pattern for storytelling an interesting love story. In that case, you could actually hack this hack if you wanted to, putting it in a different setting. On page 114, Grant Howitt suggests this RPG could be placed in the setting of Love Actually, the movie, or Immortal Vampire in Love, high school dramas, a Shakespearean romance, or pretty much any movie you can think of where the female character eventually falls for a guy. The two don't like each other at first, but then love prevails. So, you can decide the actual setting, but think of this as the framework to tell a love story in RPG form. Love Story RPG Activate. To keep things simple, let's keep with Pride and Prejudice for the setting and theme of our game. Before, I mentioned this happens in the Georgian era in Great Britain. These are the years between 1714 and 1837. And why the name Georgian? Well, it's because during that time, England was ruled by a couple of Georges. George I, George II, George III, and you guessed it, George IV. Think Industrial Revolution. the early stages of the steam engine, gas lights, coal-powered iron furnaces, and workshops for spinning, weaving, printing, and other textiles. In this story, your characters are to find another unmarried young adult who is a good match to get hitched to. Marriage is the ultimate goal here. You want to find a good match for each of your characters. And ideally, you want somebody with good looks, money, and class. You're going to be shallow here, but remember, like the Rolling Stones saying, you can't always get what you want. To begin creating your character, you'll make both a man and a woman character. As mentioned before, both are young and unmarried. The official character sheet for Regency Ladies is on page 120 of the Goblin Quest rulebook. There are a total of 3 main stats, and you really should think of them almost as point pools that you get to spend throughout the game. The first is charm. Charm is a raw force of personality, likability, and physical attractiveness. The higher a character's charm, they can make connections to others more easily. A charm of 6 is very attractive, the talk of society, not necessarily in looks. Charm 1, however, is a character who's unable to navigate social situations and probably has a lot of difficulty. They go unnoticed and ignored. The second stat is standing. And this is your social standing, your class in society and connections. The higher your standing, the easier you'll be able to maintain your composure. A standing of 6 is a lord or lady. A standing of 1 is as low as you can go while still owning some type of property in this messed up, shallow society. And the third means is your money. It's your raw influence of financial power. Means lets you break the rules of the game through social situations. A 6 means is you're loaded with an estate. A 1 means you're barely scraping by without losing everything. To roll stats for both your female and male character, you will roll a 6-sided dice only 3 times. Ladies first, as chivalry will say. Roll the dice, assign the results of the roll as the charm score for your female character first. Then you're going to take the inverse of that number and assign it to your male's charm score. Example. You roll a 6-sided dice and you get a 1 for your woman's charm score. That is her charm score. The inverse of that on the other side of the dice would be a 6 or the opposite. So your male's charm score will be 6. He's quite the charmer. You'll then do this 2 more times, rolling once for standing and once for means. I've gone ahead and rolled for both my woman and my man. And to keep things clear, my woman's name is Kate Haverton, and my man's name is Jasper Blackwell. That's Mr. Blackwell to you, thank you very much. Kate has a charm of 2, standing of 5, and a means of 6. So what does this mean in the game, in the story? She's not a very attractive person or maybe just really unlikable. She's of fairly high standing in society with a ton of money. Mr. Blackwell, on the other hand, with the inverse of those numbers, he has a charm of 5, a standing of 2, and a means of 1. What does this mean in the story? He's a very attractive man with low standing and is possibly about to lose everything to his name. After rolling the stats and interpreting them, you can choose a character archetype to reference during play. We've done most of the work here, but let's put pen to paper in this pen and paper tabletop RPG, shall we? Mr. Blackwell will be a penniless aristocrat. His house, with modest farm, has 1 to 2 servants who are more like family than hired workers. Kate Haverton, on the other hand, is a beautiful yet cold heiress to a large textile workshop empire. If any man could woo her, they would be set for life, but trapped in a loveless future the way she acts. Next, we'll dip into the flaws. Adding character flaws is something I have loved as a part of my game since I first played D&D 5e. Flaws can create some amazing storytelling opportunities, sometimes more powerful than a character using their assets or attributes. Female character flaws focus on their internal conflict. I rolled a 6-sided dice and got a 5 and used the table on page 116, which tells me that Kate Haverton is too rash. She acts and speaks without considering the consequences, and this may account for her failure to find love and marriage at the beginning of our game. Male character flaws, on the other hand, focus on a troubled past. I rolled a 6-sided dice and got a 1, and the table on page 115 tells me the following about Mr. Blackwell. During the war, I shamefully... and then I get to fill in the blank. I'm going to say that he shamefully deserted his entire militia to be slaughtered during the War of 1812 over in the colonies before returning home to England. Next up, on your character sheet, there is a spot near the bottom for bonds. You'll want to write down everyone else's character names at the bottom of the sheet as you will be bonding with them during the gameplay. At the start of the game, you will randomly, through rolling a dice maybe, choose another player's character at the table. You will automatically have a rank 1 bond with that player's character and add 1 point in your bonds pool next to their name. An example would be I'm playing with 6 other players at the table. I roll a 1d6 after assigning in my head a number to each player. I rolled a 2, and this means that I'm going to have a bond with one of Annette's characters. Feel free to roll again or just choose. Let's say Annette has a female by the name of Delphinium Rosebud. I am going to have her share a bond with my woman character, Kate Haverton. And so, next to Delphinium's name on my character sheet, I am going to put 1 bond point next to the name Delphinium. I put a 1 bond rating. That's what that means. Annette would likewise put a 1 next to Kate Haverton's name on the sheet. We both share the bond, so we each get a point for the bond that's being shared. Now, story-wise, we can make up a reason why they're bonded. Maybe they're relatives, school friends, bosom buddies, whatever. Quick pause on the episode. Have you felt like life is too crazy busy that the tabletop role-playing games you've always wanted to learn and play are passing you by? The Claim to Game podcast has one mission: helping busy people master tabletop role-playing games one game at a time. If you are enjoying what you are hearing, please share the Claim to Game podcast with others. Share it with at least one other person you know who listens to podcasts and who could benefit from this show and what it has to offer. This helps grow the show, spreads the message, and helps others learn new tabletop RPGs. Remember to share the show once you finish listening today. Thanks. And now back to the episode. Let's start some gameplay. This game takes place over the course of 2 years with 4 scenes per year. Now, this isn't actual years, this is game years. The steps are fairly clear how to play. First, you will determine if you are playing your male or female character before the scene is created. On page 117, there is a table which you will roll a 1d6 to determine what type of scene you'll be playing out. If the current year has not yet had a scene with a ball, you get to add +1 to your dice roll. Balls are super important. As in dances, of course. Next, you'll be rolling to control the scene and swap characters. All players roll 1d6, and whoever rolls the highest takes control of the scene. Their character, the one they pick to play the scene, is in charge of the event happening in the scene. You can spend your standing to increase your roll if you wish. So, for Mr. Blackwell, he has a standing of 2, hardly anything at all. But we'll say that he spends 1 standing point, reducing his standing from 2 to 1 in order to go first in the scene. Here's how it works. Mr. Blackwell is the character I chose. I rolled first year, first scene, the number 4 on my dice, but a ball hasn't happened or taken place yet. That's 4 plus 1 equals 5. I end up having the highest number, so I get to have control of the scene. The table on page 117 advises me the scene is all about a dinner. Let's say that Mr. Blackwell was out managing the fields in their soon-to-be lost estate. His ailing, sickly mother decided to take the fate of the family into her own hands. She is the forbidden love of Kate Haverton's very wealthy father, Sebastian Haverton, and they still see each other in secret for years. They've been doing this for shame and scandal. She sends a secret sealed letter to Sebastian Haverton by maidservant in the middle of the night, threatening to blackmail him if she doesn't provide her son a wife as compensation for the life he robbed her of so many years ago by marrying another woman for propriety instead of love. Not telling her son the true reason, she makes up some poppycock about their falling into good fortune, and he's been invited to a dinner to woo the hand of Kate Haverton's sister, Penelope Haverton, this very night. When the character is in control of the scene, besides getting to frame the scene and describe what's going on like I did above, they also can do 2 things. They can choose another player who they will force to swap out the character that they chose to play that scene, and now that player has to play their alternative character. So if somebody had done this to me, they would say, "Oh, sorry, Clint, you actually have to play Kate Haverton and not Mr. Blackwell." And my heart, of course, would be torn asunder. The final thing a character in charge can do is to determine when everybody has to stop spending their means points and their bonds points. And we'll get to all that in just a moment. Once the scene has been described by the person in charge, your group will go around the table giving each player a chance to describe what their character is doing. Each person can also declare if they have intentions to propose to anyone else's character at this event. Not necessary for the first scene, but we'll leave that up to each player. Now, declaring a proposal is all fine and good, but there are rules to this, you know. You can't just go getting hitched to anyone. Male characters can propose to female characters once the bond between them is ranked 2 or higher. How will you do this? Well, you're going to roll 1d6 before the scene in which you wish to propose. If you roll a number that is equal to or under the bond rating you have with that character, you can propose. If not, it just doesn't work. You either get too scared or it's not the right time, blah, blah, blah. Your dice results, however, are kept secret by you during the scene so that you can spring the proposal at the appropriate time within the story. And here's the kicker. Female characters can always refuse marriage. Now that's what I'm talking about. Woman power. Remember, the goal here to win the game is to get married, but maybe you have your eyes set on another character to tie the knot. You'll want to try to marry another character before the end of the 8th scene on the 2nd year when the game ends. Next, characters will be rolling for first impressions at the event. In this case, the event is a dinner that has been concocted through spurned lovers. Every character will roll dice. Let the good times roll and have each person roll the number of dice equal to their charm stat. If I'm using Mr. Blackwell, he's charming as hell, and I get to roll 5 whole dice, 5 big ones. Charm represents their presence in the situation. At the end of the scene, players will compare each of their dice in the dice lineup with the dice of other characters. For each dice that matches another player's dice, players will have a bond with one another, and they will add bond points next to the corresponding character's name in their bond section on their character sheet. Now, this concept confused me at first, but the bottom line is that you will be using your character's means stat points and bond stat points to change the rolled dice numbers of the other player's dice lineup. This allows you to spend your stats like points to either bump up or down the initial dice rolled results from the other characters when they rolled their first impression. All of this is done to achieve the ultimate goal of being able to declare a proposal and have the best chances of getting your character married off by the end of the 8th scene in the 2nd year of the game, which is when the game ends. If any of the dice you rolled in your first impression have numbers that match, you have to add a tally representing a point on the flaw section of your character sheet for each matching dice. I previously rolled my 5 dice and got a 3, 4, 5, and 2 6s. This means I have to put 2 tally marks representing 2 flaw points on my character sheet. Next, it's time to throw around your means and money. Start with the character who has the lowest means first, and then take turns progressing up to the characters with the highest means. If there is a tie for who gets to go first, have a roll-off with your dice. The lowest result wins. This means, you're really, really poor. Spending means, or money and resources, should be role-played. So if a player wants to try to change Mr. Blackwell's 3, 4, 5, 6, and 6, they could say, I'm a very wealthy banker named Charles Thurston, who's been invited to the Haverton dinner. I see Blackwell sitting there in his shabby finery trying to look like he belongs, but I take pity on him. I slip him a bag of small silver coins, give him a wink, and walk to my seat discreetly. I'm sure he'll invest in me in the future once he's been able to make it big. Mechanically, the player could say, I want to spend 2 of my 3 means to change Blackwell's 3 to a 5. This gets him closer to having a dice match, and this is the goal here, right? Having a dice match, getting closer to matching other players so that you can get bond points to then change their dice in the future. Other players, however, can spend their standing points to resist the change in the dice. Each point is a 1-for-1. Unfortunately, Mr. Blackwell, my character, already spent 1 of his 2 standing points. In order for Mr. Blackwell to resist, you have to have equal to or more points than what the player is spending on you to block them. And I don't have that. So Mr. Blackwell's standing of 1 does not outdo Charles Thurston's means of 2. So Blackwell has no choice but to take the money. And I, as a player, have to change my 3 dice to a 5. Everyone has to spend their means at least once, and the process can continue until the player who is in charge says it's time to stop. Next, you get to exploit your bonds. The character with the lowest charm spends any bonds they've made to adjust dice the same way the previous round allowed everybody to use their means to adjust dice. Each bond spent allows a player to choose another player's dice to be changed one number increment for each bond you're spending. The catch here is that you can only spend your bond points on the character that you're bound to. Remember what bonds you to the character? Well, you got the freebie bond at the very beginning of the game with 1 point, and other bond points are accumulated as you play the game and move through the scenes. At the end of the scenes, when your dice match up with other characters, that's when you are adding more bond points in your bond pool to the characters that you're making bonds with. So you'll evidently have more bond points towards the end of the game than you do in the beginning. The catch here is that characters cannot use their standing status points here to deflect the bond adjustments. Passion wins over manners, of course. Manners be damned, good sir. Sorry, I got passionate there. The flow of this part of the scene continues, each person getting to spend one bond at a time to adjust one dice at a time until the person in charge says it's time to stop. Remember, to role-play these bonds being used, earlier I said that make-believe, made-up, not-real player Annette had a female character named Delphinium Rosebud. That character shares a bond with my female character, Kate Haverton. We'll say they are old snobby boarding school friends turned bosom buddies. I'm going to say that Kate uses the bond between her and Delphinium to gossip about Mr. Blackwell having said something uncouth and rude about Delphinium. Of course, Mr. Blackwell would never, but Kate secretly has started to develop feelings for our dear Mr. Blackwell, and if she can't have him, she wants her sister Penelope to have him instead, not Delphinium. Oh, the drama. Mechanically, we will say I have player Annette change one of her dice currently at a 3 to a 4, and this makes her further away from matching Mr. Blackwell. The scene is almost over, I promise, and at this point, once the bond round is over, if any of your dice match the dice of another character, you receive bond points that you put in to the bond point pool for that character. Put it right next to their name on your character sheet. And vice versa, the other character gets a point as well to their bond pool in the same way next to your character's name. Also at this point, if any of your dice match each other, go ahead and put a tally mark next to your flaw section on your character sheet to mark a point towards your flaw. Now for male characters, here's how flaws work. Once you hit 3 flaw marks or 3 tallies next to your flaw, it comes to the surface somehow during roleplay. For Mr. Blackwell, his internal conflict was deserting his entire company during the war, and they were all killed. Maybe he starts feeling commitment issues and stands up the character who he was supposed to meet for a leisurely stroll in the meadows that afternoon, negatively affecting their opinion of him. For Kate Haverton, her flaw is an internal conflict with being too rash. Maybe she publicly and verbally humiliates another character by shouting all of their worst attributes at the top of her voice at the most recent ball. Once an internal conflict is triggered by gaining 3 flaw marks, that flaw must appear in the next scene the character is in. For male characters, once you've gained 6 flaw marks, remember through having dice that match a number, then you get to undo that flaw, having a good reason for doing whatever you did all along. An example might be that Mr. Blackwell, who's a deserter, he got a letter that his mother was on her deathbed, and if he didn't leave now without the permission of his commanding officer, he would never have got to say goodbye to his poor mum before she left for the next world. For female characters, once again, you gain 6 flaw marks, you get to overcome the internal flaw, having a change of heart to become a different person now. For Kate, she realizes there's more to life than being in control, and her loneliness and isolation from these rash behaviors was just her creating her own barriers to distance herself from true love. Deep, man. That's real deep. Once the bonds and the flaws have been resolved, you do this all over again. 4 scenes per year, 2 years per game. By the end, maybe you will convince another player character to marry you through the declaration of proposal mechanic, and maybe you'll marry well. Okay, final thought. I'll admit that this game might be more fun than I originally thought. Next time I want to put on a sense of propriety and hard-to-get snootiness, I'll pull out Regency Ladies for a night of emotional, dramatic highs and lows. Join us next time as we end our quest claiming Goblin Quest. That's correct. You hear me right. We've made our way through this entire game as well as all 7 rules hacks that come along with it. The next episode will be a debriefing of the key takeaways that this game has provided me, and we'll talk about a new direction that Claim to Game is taking in Season 2. Let's get jiggy with it. Have you been listening to this first season of the CTG and do not yet have your very own copy of Goblin Quest the RPG? Picture yourself pretending to be gross, grotty little buggers on your next game night with your closest friends. Laughs, goofs, and goblins. Don't wait. Click on the link in the show notes. Don't like goblins? Enjoy 7 different Goblin Quest setting hacks in the back of the core rulebook. It's almost like getting 8 games for the price of 1. Enjoy your own copy of Goblin Quest the RPG today. And until the next time we make our claim to game, one game at a time.